when you have meetings and things, the loudest voice is the one that's driving the agenda.
Welcome to another episode of Procurement Mastermind Podcast. I'm Omid Gamami, and I'm pleased today to have with me Anis Bennani. He's Procurement Director of Infrastructure at Microsoft, and he's also author of the negotiation book, Getting What Matters. Anis, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Omid.
Oh, the pleasure is mine, and we're going to talk about some really cool topics today, taking costs out of the purchase, negotiation strategies, and just really digging into your brain. So let's kind of start into things. The first thing that jumped out at me about your background is, you have a couple of master's degrees, one in networking, another one in software security. This is not the traditional path to procurement. So how did you end up from studying these things to landing in procurement?
Well, I wish, Omid, I can tell you it's all pre-planned. With engineers, when they're asking how did you end up in engineering, they will say, yeah, when I was 4 or 5 years old, I used this assemble, my dad's car and put it back. For procurement, probably it will be when I was 4 or 5 years old. I used to read my dad lease agreement for cars and make the negotiation. But yeah, it's far from reality. It wasn't planned. I've graduated indeed with technical masters, but it happened during the 2008 financial crisis. So I wasn't able to find a job directly linked to my degree. So I've worked in for a short period in consulting. Then I moved to sales engineering. I have done sales engineering for some time, and then as most of sales engineers that move to sales, you start thinking, okay, I'm doing the heavy lifting, working with the sales, doing all these technical design and architectural stuff, and then my sales peer just drinking tea and coffee with the customer and getting bonuses. So I thought, okay, maybe I should move there. And I can tell you, I underestimated the sales responsibility. I went there thinking it's about drinking tea, coffee, making jokes with customer, and it was much more complex than that, because it was dealing with humans and influential humans. So I stayed in sales for a long period. I really enjoyed it, especially the building connections with customers. And at a certain time, I wanted to move to the cloud provider games, the hyperscaler. They were driving cool technological breakthroughs across the board, and I wanted to move there. Then the roles that were somehow related to my background were in procurement. So this is how I ended up in procurement.
Interesting. And what's really neat is you went from this technical role, which I think um, is underrated and underappreciated, because then you're able to understand the language of end users and suppliers, and you're able to drive influence both directions. But you also then went into sales, and I've always felt that that's such an asset, because then you get counterintelligence. After all, we're generally negotiating with sales. That's who they send to negotiate with procurement, and you're getting this counterintelligence. So how did having a sales background help you become a better procurement negotiator?
Yeah, I like the term counterintelligence. It sounds like we need to coexist but keep an eye on each other. Basically, I will tell you, I was starting to get counterintelligence when I was in sales. Uh,
Mm.
and I was in sales. I went through all this training about like how to become a best salesperson, sales leader. And I was a bit frustrated because most of these training they were done by salespeople or ex-salespeople. So they're always talking about the customer as this black box. This is how the customer thinks, and this is how we should do with the customers. And I was looking for something deeper, how to get insight from the customer perspective, which is like procurement professional. And I haven't told you that before. Like I've been in touch for some time, but I did that, and I found this counterintelligence on procurement through your material. So it was like probably 2010, 2011. You just had the book Purchasing Advantage out. So I read it. I was in sales. I read it. Then I found your video material. I went to one of your online training. It was a massive insight into the procurement mindset when I was in sales.
Mm,
And I'll just like pass on the technicalities around the design for TCU and all the amazing things that you were flagging there. But something that really stuck in my mind when I was in sales is that you were flagging is that the procurement people usually they are they're like firemen. They're always like chasing things to get done. They're always behind schedule, behind budget. And something that you said at that time, it was years ago, is like the best salespeople are the ones that make their counterpart in procurement look like a hero. And
yes.
from that moment, it really stuck in my mind, and I lived by it when I was in sales. It was like how I can make my counterpart in procurement look like a hero internally. And
Yeah.
it has helped me in so many aspects. Now back to your question about like the perspective between sales and procurement. I would say if we look at it just from a process perspective, the incentive for both sides is different, basically. So from a sales perspective, the incentive will be numbers, making sales, sometimes profits, according like to the companies. From a procurement perspective, it's about uh, about cost saving, cost avoidance from a commercial side, and then delivery timelines, specs timelines, quality. When you look at the incentive, they are different, and these two words needs to coexist and find common ground. And I agree with you, having perspective from both sides and living both sides. Uh, make it not easier, but develop a sort of empathy to understand each other.
Yes, for sure. And and it's interesting because not only what they're trying to focus on is different, and I like how you said, these two worlds need to coexist. But the interesting thing is, if I've always felt if you're exclusively negotiating with sales, a problem arises, and that problem is that sales can negotiate price and de facto profit, right? Because if they negotiate a lower price, they're negotiating lower profit. But it leaves the opportunity on the table of negotiating cost, and usually sales is not playing in that space. So there's breakthroughs that can happen when you understand the sales side of the house and some of those levers. So, what are the kind of breakthroughs you've seen by coming into procurement with a sales background, understanding how sales operates, and what are the benefits of coming with this background? What breakthroughs have you seen, or do you think can happen?
So uh, uh, I would say there are some myths in sales that when you move to procurement, they disassemble straight away. The first one is about BAFO. BAFO is the term of best and final offers. And in sales, when I was in sales, I always like when the product management, or the marketing came to say this is the BAFO. It feels like the late Queen Elizabeth or King Charles is saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the BAFO," and then the whole show has stopped, and that's it. It's like take it or leave it. So I came into procurement with this mindset. Once the sales or like the supplier says this is the BAFO, it's the end of the game. But then my first deal, I because I've been through your material for some time. I started trying to understand beyond the price discussion what goes beyond it, and by doing that, you start getting engaged into how the supply chain of your supplier works and the different aspects of it. And then I started asking question. Well, if we change this or that, or like can you explain to me this and that? And then the first time I'm hearing myself say this is the buffer, then I ask question. Then we both realize that the pricing doesn't make sense because whatever explanation doesn't make sense. And then the salesperson came again and said, no, this is the buffer again, another buffer then. And then we had another discussion. And then we start tweaking things. And then the salesperson for the third time can say, yeah, that's it, that's the buffer. And then we had like 3 or 4 iterations after that,
Yeah.
where I realized that the buffer is a myth at the end of the day. It has dependency on so many parameters
Yes.
that in reality, the deal structure could change at any time the moment you change what lays behind the pricing itself. So so
Yes.
So I would say, as a spoiler alert for whoever new to sales and procurement, I'm thinking BAFO is a myth. Now, I would love when people stop using that. So that's the first thing about in terms of things that I realized moving from sales to procurement.
Yes.
The other piece which I took from sales and start using in procurement a lot is preparation. And it has changed my way of working in procurement over the years for myself and my teams as well. So in sales, when I was there, we would spend hours preparing for deals, hour preparing for meetings, to the details about, like, yeah, when someone will tell a joke during the meeting with the customer, someone will be coughing during the meeting with the customer, to that level of details. Then I moved to
Yes.
procurement, and then it was about like fire and getting things done very quickly with the pressure and everything. And my first deals there, several millions of dollars, so quite an important deal. And then I started asking my colleagues, okay, can we get together and prepare like several weeks ahead of the meeting with the suppliers, and say, no, we are very busy. We have a lot of priorities to do. Let's keep it for later. And then we ended up delaying the preparation until like 15 minutes before the supplier meeting, thinking that we are going to go there and wing it, So we went there, whatever we tried to achieve was not achievable. And at that time, I started realizing how important preparation is from a procurement perspective. And it changed the way I work. It changed the way my teams work. So we started to have like weekly brainstorming. People are paired up together to have perspective from each other and prepare well in advance. So that's another thing that was insightful moving from sales to procurement. The third thing that comes to mind is about perception and communication. So, and I've seen it a lot over the years. So you'll have like the customer, the suppliers, both sides with orgs, they are working together for sometimes, and the deals falls apart. And then everybody's just wondering what happened. Like we have been in touch for a month. We thought that the deal is there, and then the deal falls apart. And the
Yeah.
reality what happened is that both sides, they jump to solutioning very quickly. The sales side, well, they heard the customer requirement, they jumped very quickly to it. And from a sales perspective, most of the time, like, they assume that customer is right, and even if customer is saying nonsense things, customer is the king and customer is right. And from a procurement perspective, most of the time people will just jump into solving the problem without realizing what really is the problem. Like,
Yes.
we will get a spec and say, okay, this is the spec, we need to meet the spec, and without understanding what these specs are for, or what performance are they serving, or what's the end goal of these specs. uh, and this happens a lot, and it happens a lot when both sides have been dealing with each other for a long time, where you would hear like a sales director saying, yeah, I know this customer, I've been dealing with them for 10 years, and the customer wants XYZ, that's it, I know them. And then from the procurement's perspective as well, or the procurement side, they have been doing it for ages. They know their industry, they know their supplier, they know the market. This is how it has done. And I saw that firsthand when I was in sales engineering. So it was one of my first jobs, and we were having like a renewal with the customer. So the pattern was the following: every 2 years, keep the same contract, single sourcing. Okay, we keep the same budget while adding new features to it. So we went into this renewal. I was there just at the beginning of the next cycle, with the same assumption. Like, we knew the customer, we have been doing it for 10 years, what could have changed? So I spent like several months working on the roadmap, what are the new features to add, working with finance to keep the budget the same pattern as before. And we're meeting with the customer, having discussion, validating the assumptions, and everything was all right, at that time. And out of the blue, the sales director I was working with got a call from the CFO saying, sorry, things are not going the way we expect them to go. We are going to take this to RFP and open it up to the market. So with hindsight, what happened is that the sales director was dealing with the same people, the head of procurement, the CFO. But in reality, if you remember, I told you the financial crisis of 2008. That was the period of it. And in reality, what happened is the CFO was about to retire. The deputy CFO came in. His real KPI is reducing the cost. So he didn't care about having any additional services. All what
Yes.
he wanted at that time is reducing the cost, keeping everything the same. So the learning from this situation is every deal, every project is unique. And
Yes.
from a customer and supplier perspective, they need to keep checking their assumptions, and they need to be upfront about their goal. First thing is, before engaging into the discussion, they should be upfront about their goal. Like, this is what we want to achieve from both sides. And during
Yeah.
the engagement, if things start not to make sense, a perspective is to state the obvious. Sometimes you just say, hey, like, are we losing trust here? Things doesn't seem to be going the right way, and put it on the table to address that. Not waiting like until late in the game and then having some sort of like unexpected situation.
There was so many gold nuggets there. I'm having hard time keeping track on my head, but a couple of things really jumped out for me. One, about the preparation. Sales has unquestionably more resources, budget, training, better systems, tools, all of these kinds of things, and standard methodologies to prepare than procurement does. And I'm reminded of a quote by Abraham Lincoln. And if I remember it right, he said, if I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. And so that preparation aspect is absolutely critical. And we're so swamped in procurement, we don't have time to do the proper preparations. And we're lucky that the money is doing a lot of the work for us. If we went into that level of preparation from the sales side, it wouldn't be a good outcome. And then you talked about this overwhelming focus on specs, and this is what we want, and sales says we know what they want. One of the big kisses of death in procurement is from a sales perspective, what I think is, when a salesperson says, or a sales organization says, the customer is always right, this is the kiss of death, because the customer is very frequently wrong. And I can't tell you how many hundreds of times I've seen companies and government sectors focus on what they want to buy instead of what they want to accomplish. And you kind of alluded to this. And they end up buying the wrong thing. They're fixated on that spec or scope of work, which does not actually solve the problem. And most of the time, the supplier knows this is not the ideal way to do this, but they comply in the name of the customer is always right. So it's hugely problematic. Moving on to the next question. One thing that really surprised me about you're just a box full of surprises with your background, is that although you're highly technical, it just screams from your bio, screams from our ongoing discussions over the years, and also from your book that you wrote, which I read, that you're hugely focused on the human side of negotiations, the human side of procurement, and the behavioral aspects. And tell us a little bit about your learnings and perspectives in this space, and how it's helped you become a better procurement leader.
And first, thanks a lot for reading my book. Really, really appreciate it. Basically, the enlightenment moment for me happened when I moved from sales to procurement. So when I was in, I dealt with a lot of procurement people that were tough, or like could be described as tough, poker face, don't show emotion, don't engage into any connections. And that was for me, the role model, like for a procurement. When I started, I wanted, that's the only model I saw. So I said, okay, I will be like that. So I would say the first 3 months into the role, my role, like years ago when I started procurement, I was like poker face. I'm not engaging with the supplier on any connection. We have these RFP, speak to me about the RFP, that's it. And out of the blue, I was attending a conference, and I had one of the leaders I really respected. He came to me, and he knew me in my sales time. He said, Anis, you're not smiling anymore. Like, what happened? Like, what are you like that? Like, it's not your nature. And at that time, I just thought, okay, maybe I wasn't really genuine in my way of working. Like I wasn't bringing my own identity. And uh, I would say at the beginning, I was really focused on the process. You know, we spoke about the process, about really the process of procurement, and I was missing the point about people. And my first deal were not really optimal in procurement. I was hammering like the discussion on pricing, not trying to understand what lays behind the pricing, not trying to understand like even the dynamics from from the supplier perspective. And from that moment, I decided maybe there is something behind the process, like beyond the process, which is people. And I
Yes.
started to realize that we as people, like if I put like humanity as a bucket, we have much more in common that we think
Yes.
deep down as needs. Like most of us would have the following needs, like needs for appreciation, okay, or respect, needs for belonging, needs to have some sort of freedom and autonomy in our decision, needs to have some sort of recognition about roles and status, okay. So I started realizing to have a lot in common. The thing is how to create connection to tap into these needs. And the moment you create this connection to tap into these needs, this is where the magic happens. This is where like great collaboration happens. This is where people go like the last mile for you. And
Yes.
the moment I started switching my attitude from the process to people, this is where I started doing breakthrough in my work and in the
Yes.
industry I was working on. So basically, what I mentioned to you is about creating this human connection, and I realize it goes beyond culture. You know, there are a lot of talks about cultural aspects, and people are different because of the 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 cultures they are coming from. And with time, I realize it's not true at the end of the day. And here
Universal in this case.
yeah. So basically, I'm using an analogy from a role model that I consider a model for me in negotiation. Professor Stuart Diamond is emeritus professor at Wharton Business School, international negotiation expert, and he gives this example that's really enlightening, or like I found enlightening, is you could be sitting next to someone at your office, okay, same nationality as you, okay, you have the same background, okay, you have technical, background, you grow up in the same place, okay, and you will have probably less connection from an identity perspective with this person that someone that we believe in thousands of kilometers away in another country with a different nationality than you, okay, different
Yes.
upbringing than you. And one example he gives, which I really love, is like maybe at a certain time of your life, your identity is you see yourself as like a parent, okay, and you'll connect with the person thousands of kilometers away on parenting issues, okay? Because like they're facing similar parenting issues, and those won't be the way that your colleague next to you, same upbringing, same background, will identify themselves.
Yeah.
So for me, there is an element of cultural aspect, but it's sort of gateway. It's just a gateway to open it up and to connect from a human perspective.
You're absolutely right. And in fact, people overlook this. And as you talk about the poker face, but one of the fundamental tenets of human psychology and negotiations is you have the biggest breakthroughs when people have three things that they feel about you, and that's that they know, like, and trust you. And when you can establish those things, it sets a framework, as you said, for collaboration, for breakthroughs, and so forth. Now, speaking about breakthroughs, and since you have a technical background, let's talk about design for cost, or what I call design for TCO,
Yes.
which is instead of just accepting what the end user comes with, instead analyzing that demand and how it was articulated and looking for cost savings opportunities, not by compressing supplier profit margin and supplier price, but rather really assessing, was the demand streamlined for cost and TCO? Was it articulated in the most cost efficient fashion while still achieving the desired performance outcomes? And I can tell you, my organization has been finding, on average, about 18% cost savings in this space with clients. When we go and look at the contracts where we think there's an opportunity and we dive in, that's what we're finding, and that's before negotiating with suppliers. So, tell us about what you've kind of seen and what value you see in this space.
Yeah, I think there are two perspectives. The first one is, I would say, internally, is having the discussion internally, understanding internally, like what are we trying to achieve, and for that you need to have some sort of, I would say, you need to speak the business language. And I found procurement functions like super fascinating from the perspective that the procurement role is at the intersection of a lot of functions. So a procurement professional, if it was a person, it will be like a very polyglot person. They speak
Yeah.
the legal language, the finance language, the operational language, the technical language. Probably I've missed like the product language. So they can speak all these languages. And the fact that they
Yeah.
are at the intersection of all these roles give them the opportunity to go and understand what every of these function is trying to achieve. Because
Absolutely.
the contract at the end is not the translation, okay, of what every of these functions are trying to achieve. Uh, and having or speaking these languages of different function is key, because most of the time the contract is trying to capture things, but and the contract sometimes it has been there like for a few years, it hasn't been touched, and people are just using it because it has been there, maybe it's complacency, or it just like sometimes is the way everybody just saying, oh, this is the way business is done. But then
Yeah.
by trying to understand what every function is trying to achieve,
Yes.
this is where breakthrough is happening, because like this is how you are going to translate your requirements. You will go beyond specs to talk about performance. And I love this concept. Like I loved it the first time I saw it on your material and your training. Uh, and it resonates with me because like if I just make a discretion here, my book is about getting what matters. It's not about like getting a lot or getting less or getting something else. It's like you need to
Yes.
understand what really matters, and that should be your goal to achieve. So that's the perspective from an internal side. From an external side, is key to have the same discussions, because the usual communication between a customer and supplier is happening between the procurement and the sales team. And if it stays at that level, you are just scratching the surface. So from a procurement perspective, they need to go and talk about different functions with the suppliers, okay, their engineering, their operation, their legal, and have the same discussion to understand like the supply chain, how it works from a supplier perspective, and see if there is an optimization. So it goes both sides,
This is really critical, and you took me into my next question, which is about exactly what you mentioned, because this design for TCO, it starts internally. It starts with the end users and with the organization, the different organizations internally, shifting to what it is they want to accomplish, and then reverse engineering what is the most effective way to do that from a spec or scope of work perspective, and having the debate be about what they want to accomplish, not so much about this is the way we must accomplish
Yes.
that goal. But then it goes externally. And then and traditionally, procurement is completely comfortable negotiating exclusively with sales, which once again is the kiss of death, because
Yes.
sales can negotiate price and profit, but they rarely have insight into cost. And let's talk about what it means and how it's a game changer to involve everybody from the sales side, from the supplier side, I should say, that touches cost beyond just the salespeople who are leading negotiations. What kind of breakthroughs can happen by taking that next step?
So I would say a lot of breakthroughs can happen. The first thing is usual situation. Procurement and sales are talking, okay, and then there is a deadlock. Most of the time, deadlocks are happening because procurement or the sales side haven't engaged the right function on the background. And all
Mm.
what you see from the outside, if you're just like a spectator of the situation, oh, there is a deadlock, we can't do anything about it, the deal is falling apart. But in reality,
Yes.
there is always like someone in the background that's causing this deadlock. So when you
Yeah.
have the procurement function speaking to the different function on the supplier side, this is where you figure out that in reality, the hard position is not that hard at the end of the day. Like maybe there is a common understanding that could happen, and I've seen it a lot. Sometimes you'll have like some deadlock on operation. No, we can't do that from an operational perspective. And then in reality, you'd speak to the operational person, and you find that they're under tremendous pressure. To meet some performance KPIs that they're just like super super conservative on their position, and it translates on the position of the whole company. And you can find it on the legal side, you can find it on the finance side. Sometimes it's interesting to understand, how these costs are done, and by that, like engaging with the finance team on the other side, or engaging with like the shareholder of the suppliers, because most of the time, whatever decision is done, there is like an input from shareholder perspective about it, from a cost or
I
pricing.
think you mean stakeholder, right?
I mean the owner of the company, like the shareholder.
Oh, okay. I got it. I got it. In the case
So
of a private company.
yes,
You know,
yeah, the risk with it has a lot of benefits to achieve breakthroughs, a lot, by having this communication. That's what I have been seeing, which is interesting, that sometimes it can derail the whole discussion, this type of conversation. And
yes,
and the reason for that is like when you have meetings and things, the loudest voice is the one that's driving the agenda. Okay.
yes.
So when you move beyond the procurement sales discussion, you can find that some suppliers, the loudest voice is operation. Okay. And then
Mm,
operation can be the loudest voice and start driving the agenda, which derail the whole discussion from, we have a goal as both companies to achieve, to, well, we need to take into account all the risk for this deal, or sometimes it's the legal function, or sometimes the finance side, or the products, or whatever. So I can see clear benefits in having these engagements, but the key thing for it to work is you need to have sponsors on both sides. Like
yes,
someone that's taking a step back. It could be, and I would say naturally, it is the sales function that should do that. They should keep everybody in track, because
yes.
I've seen it a lot of times where, a lot of stakeholders are coming from supplier side, or are coming from the procurement side, and then the discussion will start to get derailed. So someone from both sides should be the sponsor of this process. When things start to get like south, that they bring people together, say, hey guys, we have a goal to achieve. Let's put it back on track. So I think that's a key thing. And when it's not happening, when it's the loudest voice on both sides that drive the discussion, this is where I see the risk of having this type of engagement.
This is really interesting because you took this in a different direction than I was thinking, and it's very enlightening. I was focusing on the cost side and focusing on the different organizations on the supplier side that influence cost and can have input on how to do things differently, perhaps moving from custom to standard materials, changing the specification without impacting quality. But you also talked about the human side and about the business side and where they may have deliverables or issues. And when you're just negotiating with sales, that's the face of the supplier, but you don't know who is it that has the particular agendas internally and the pressures. And so fascinating insight from you on this. Now, you're a Fortune 50 procurement executive. You're a well-known negotiation author. There's a lot of people out there, the viewers here, they all want to put their careers on the fast track. They want to, there's a lot of people who feel like their careers have been stifled. They're not making the progress they would like. What is your best advice or your number one advice to people who want to become a procurement executive like yourself? How do they put their career on that fast track? What's the secret sauce?
Just something that comes to mind is, the it's 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 a a title of a book by Marshall Goldsmith. Is like a well-known executive leader, leader, consultant and coach. And he has this book which is called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And which means that I think it applies to procurement, it applies to so many things. Like whatever you have been doing that make you reach a certain point in your career or in your life, whatever like goal you had, probably won't be, or will be, or probably will be obsolete for the next stage. So the way to articulate that, like from an actionable perspective, is if you have been doing something for some time, it's good to question the way you have been doing it. Like it applies a lot to procurement, uh, whatever field of procurement, I would say at this stage, across different industry. However, it is done today, probably if you compare it to 5, 10 years ago, it's totally different. And the
Yes.
people that adapted are the people that were able like to drive breakthrough and keep going. the one that were stuck like or resistant to change uh, would have probably found it quite hard to move on. So I would say is this ability to keep questioning the way you work and keep challenging yourself from, okay, is the way I'm doing my activity, I'm leading my org or whatever, is it the right way, and keep adapting. I would say
Yes.
it has two perspectives. Sometimes you adapt and sometimes you trigger the change. So being open to change, sometimes forcing the change to happen,
Yes.
is key to keep going.
You know, I see many, many people in procurement who have 1 year experience 20 times or 1 year of experience 25 times, and we cannot fall into that trap. So you're absolutely right. You need to keep reinventing yourself and challenging ourselves. And especially since procurement is such a self-taught profession,
Yes.
we fall into these silos where we report into people who landed into procurement by accident. We're in procurement by accident, and then you can get these blinders on where you're teaching yourselves these things that are almost inbred knowledge, and we have to be better than that. And so it's fantastic advice. Anis, this was such a wonderful session. I really appreciate your being here. And for the listeners out there, I want you to know the CPSCM certification program does a deep dive on these concepts: counterintelligence with suppliers, driving design for TCO, advanced negotiation strategies, and over 40% of the Fortune 100 is invested. So we invite all of you to join the best in the world today. Thank you again, Anis, for joining us, and we'll see all of you on the next episode of Procurement Mastermind.